Chapter 19, The Northern Front. Bristol and her classmates hurried out of Greenhouse Canyon and trekked through the in-between as quickly as possible. The closer they traveled toward the Northern Kingdom, the more the temperature dropped, and each mile felt drastically colder than the one before. The children bundled themselves tightly in their coats to endure the chilly air, but the declining weather wasn't nearly as bothersome as their sinking spirits. Bristol's conversation with the Tree of Truth was difficult for her friends to process, and hearing about it took a visible toll on them. Even though Madam Weatherbury had lied to them for honorable reasons, the students and apprentices felt betrayed by their teacher. They lowered their heads and somberly walked through the forest in silence. When the group reached the halfway point between Greenhouse Canyon and Black Bear Cave, they took their first break since leaving the Enchanted Gardens. They sat on a fallen log to rest their feet, and Bristol decided to address the issue on their minds before they continued any farther. "I understand you're all disappointed," she said. "It's never easy to find out you've been lied to by someone you love. But if you really think about it, the truth about fairies and witches doesn't change anything. We're still the same people we were at the academy, and Madam Weatherbury is still the same person we set out to save. Everything she's ever done, writing the truth about magic, standing up to the Snow Queen, starting the academy, it's all been to protect and gain acceptance for the magical community. We can forgive her for making a few mistakes along the way, can't we?" The students thought about Madam Weatherbury's intentions and ultimately agreed with Bristol's perspective, but the apprentices weren't convinced. "Tangerina, Skyline," Bristol said, "I know this is more difficult for you two because you've known Madam Weatherbury the longest. It's perfectly fine to feel whatever you're feeling right now, but one day I think you'll look back on this and—" "It's not just about Madam Weatherbury," Tangerina confessed. "I've always thought fairies were better than witches, and I liked feeling better than something else. It helped me cope with all the hatred the world sent us. Believing I was born that way made me feel valuable, like the universe was on my side." "Me too," Skyline said. "And we hated witches just like humankind hates us. But now we know we're not better than witches, and we're not any better than humankind either." Bristol knelt in front of her troubled friends and placed a hand on both of their knees. "We're all just a couple of mistakes away from becoming the people we despise," she said. "So don't think worse of yourself, but let this change how you think of yourself. Start valuing who you are more than what you are. Prove you're better than most people by showing more acceptance and empathy. And fuel your pride with what you earn and create instead of what you're born with." Tangerina and Skyline went quiet as they considered Bristol's encouraging proposal. The changes she suggested weren't easy, and it would take a lot of time and hard work, but her message inspired them to try. "You're really good at pep talks," Tangerina said. "Like, sometimes it's weird how good you are." Bristol laughed. "I have a good teacher," she said. "We all do." After a short break, the classmates continued through the in-between toward Black Bear Cave. Every few steps, Bristol compulsively checked her geography book to make sure they were going in the right direction. Within the hour, they arrived at an enormous cave at the side of a wide hill. The entrance was surrounded by several black boulders stacked to make the cave look like the mouth of a giant bear. "I'm guessing that's Black Bear Cave," Esmeralda said. "Wait, do we think there are bears in there?" Xanthus asked. "Probably," Lucy said. "I doubt Black Bear Cave got its name for housing flamingos." "Doesn't that worry anyone else?" he asked. "I mean, are we actually going inside a bear cave with a girl covered in honey?" Everyone turned to Tangerina and eyed her honeycomb jacket with concern. "Oh yeah," Bristol said. "Xanthus brings up a good point." Before they could discuss a possible precaution, the classmates were distracted by a freezing wind that blew through the forest. The wind was followed by a thunderous commotion, and suddenly the dark woods became much darker. The group looked up and saw the gray clouds of a terrible storm rolling in from the north. As the clouds covered the sky, a powerful snowstorm surged through the in-between like a white tsunami. "What's going on?" Tangerina asked. "It's a blizzard!" Bristol exclaimed. "Everyone into the cave, now!" The classmates dashed through the forest, and the blizzard chased after them like a swirling white monster. They arrived at the cave's entrance just as the storm collided with the hillside. Bristol and her friends sprinted into the cave until the blizzard's icy winds couldn't reach them. "That wasn't a normal blizzard, was it?" Skylene asked. "No," Bristol said. "The Snow Queen's destruction is spreading beyond the Northern Kingdom. This isn't just about saving Madame Weatherberry anymore. We've got to get to Tinsel Heights and stop the Snow Queen before the whole world is covered in one big storm." The future seemed grim, and as they journeyed deeper into the Black Bear Cave, their environment became just as dark. Soon the cave was pitch black, and the classmates could barely see one another. They heard another thunderous commotion coming from ahead, and they worried the blizzard had found a way inside. "Ah!" Lucy suddenly screamed. "What happened?" Xanthus asked. "Sorry, I've just felt something hairy against my leg," Lucy said. "Tangerina, was that you?" "Very funny," Tangerina said, "but I'm behind you." Bristol waved her wand and illuminated the cave with twinkling lights. All the classmates screamed when they discovered they were surrounded by over 100 black bears. Bristol and her friends grabbed one another and looked around the cave in terror, but luckily their panic was unnecessary because all the creatures were sound asleep on the ground. The snoring bears were even louder than the blizzard outside. "Did someone give them simple slumber sleeping salt too?" Skylene asked. "No, they're hibernating," Emeralda said. "But it's way too early for bears to hibernate," Xanthus said. "It's still spring." "The cold weather must be confusing them," Emeralda said. "I doubt they had time to gather enough food to survive for very long." "Nothing is going to survive a winter that lasts forever," Bristol said. "Now everyone look for the abandoned goblin tunnel. The Tree of Truth said it's somewhere in the back of the cave." The classmates searched every corner of the cave and finally found a tunnel flanked by 2 horrifying goblin statues. Bristol waved her wand, and all the twinkling lights throughout the cave flew into the tunnel to light the passageway. The classmates saw that it was perfectly round. Its walls were carved with symbols from an ancient goblin language, and it seemed virtually endless as it stretched into the distance. Before her classmates could get intimidated by the lengthy tunnel, Bristol led them inside. The students and apprentices walked for hours and hours. The passageway appeared to stretch in a perfectly straight line beneath the in-between. Bristol tried to trace their steps in her geography book, but the tunnel wasn't recorded in any of the maps, so it was impossible to tell exactly where they were. Eventually, the tunnel split into 2 different directions, and Bristol had the nerve-wracking task of choosing which way to go. "Well," Emeralda asked her, "where should we go?" Bristol looked back and forth at the tunnels, and she glanced up and down at her geography book, but she had no idea where either branch headed. "I think Tinsel Heights is to the right. Wait, to the left. No, it's to the right." Bristol marched into the tunnel on her right, confident she was making the correct choice. Her classmates followed her, but a few yards into the new tunnel, they noticed someone was missing. Bristol looked back and saw Lucy was lingering behind them. "Lucy, what are you doing?" Bristol asked. "We're going the wrong way," Lucy said. "We should take the tunnel to the left." "No, the tunnel to the right makes more sense," Bristol said. "Trust me, I've thought about this. Black Bear Cave is southeast of the Northern Kingdom, which means this tunnel is heading in a northwest direction. If the tunnel continues in a straight line, it's much more likely Tinsel Heights will be on our right than our left." "Stop thinking logically," Lucy said. "Goblins aren't logical creatures. They didn't care how straight the tunnel was, they just dug it until they found something." "But my gut is telling me we should go to the right," Bristol said. "And my gut is telling me we should go to the left," Lucy said. "Look, we always joke that I have a specialty for trouble, and right now I sense a lot of trouble coming from the left." "Please, you have to trust me on this. I can feel it in my bones." Bristol was hesitant to change directions. Her eyes darted between Lucy and the geography book, but she couldn't decide whose instincts to follow. If they made the wrong choice, they'd never make it to the Northern Kingdom in time to save Madame Weatherbury. Fortunately, Bristol didn't have to make the decision on her own. "I think we should trust Lucy," Tangerina said. Everyone was shocked by Tangerina's faith in Lucy. "Really?" Bristol asked. "You do." "Absolutely," Tangerina said. "If there's one thing Lucy knows how to do, it's stumble into a bad situation. Her gut would never lead us to safety." Lucy opened her mouth to argue, but then went silent, because she knew Tangerina was right. None of the classmates objected to Tangerina's recommendation. They all knew Lucy had a knack for trouble. Bristol took a deep breath and prayed her friends were correct. "All right," she said. "We're going to the left." A couple miles into the left tunnel, Bristol was finally able to breathe easy. The passageway began curving to the right and headed in the direction Bristol had thought the other tunnel would take them. She checked the map of magic and was extremely relieved to see her and her classmates' stars appear in the Northern Kingdom. "You were right, Lucy," Bristol said. "We're almost at Tinsel Heights." Lucy shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. "Don't mention it," she said. "I've got a sixth sense for danger." "I don't mean to interrupt this warm moment of recognition," Esmeralda said, "but do we have a plan for how we're going to save Madame Weatherbury and stop the Snow Queen once we reach Tinsel Heights?" Bristol had been mulling over a strategy since they entered Black Bear Cave, but she was so focused on getting to Tinsel Heights that she hadn't told the others what to expect when they arrived. "The Tree of Truth told me the Snow Queen is keeping Madame Weatherbury in Tinsel Palace," Bristol said. "We'll go to the palace and lure the Snow Queen out with a distraction. Once she's away, we'll go inside and find Madame Weatherbury. Then we'll wait for the Snow Queen to return, take her by surprise, and kill her?" Skylene asked. "Yes," Bristol said with difficulty. "How are we going to do that?" Xanthus said. "I suppose there are more possibilities now that we know witchcraft is an option." Bristol knew that part of the plan was inevitable, but she didn't know how they were going to go through with it. Despite all of the suffering and damage the Snow Queen had caused, Bristol couldn't fathom hurting her, let alone ending her life. "I'm not sure yet," she told the others, "but I'll think of something." As they reached the outskirts of Tinsel Heights, the abandoned goblin tunnel came to a dead end at a huge pile of collapsed rocks. At the top of the pile, they could see beams of light coming from above ground. Bristol figured this was a good place to depart the tunnel, so she transformed the rocks into a staircase and the classmates climbed to the surface. As the group emerged from underground, the air was so cold the passing breeze burned their skin. Every last inch of the area for miles and miles around them was covered in thick snow, and even more snow fell from the gray clouds above. They had arrived at the base of a towering mountain range with sharp peaks and steep slopes. In the distance to the north, the classmates spotted the pointed towers of Tinsel Palace peeking out from behind the mountain tops. In the distance to the south, in the heart of a valley below the mountain range, was the small town of Appleton Village. The village was the only place in the Northern Kingdom that hadn't been destroyed, and it was obvious that the country's entire population was gathered there. The cottage homes and shops were surrounded by a sea of tents for all the refugees who had fled there. Not only did they find themselves in the center of a wintry storm, but the classmates had also surfaced in the middle of a war zone. The base of the mountain was filled with soldiers frantically preparing for battle. A tall man with a black beard gave orders to the soldiers as they ran around him, and Bristol assumed he was the General White she had heard about. "Get those cannons into position," the general shouted. "As for the rest of you, I want 1 row behind me and 2 rows ahead of me. We must use whatever weapons and strength we have left. This is our last chance to save the kingdom. We cannot let her pass the mountains. I repeat, we cannot let her pass the mountains." Just a few dozen men were all that remained of the Northern Kingdom's army. After months of combat, every soldier was exhausted, battered and bruised, and the majority of their armor was damaged or missing. However, the men valiantly pushed through the pain and followed their general's demands. "These guys aren't going to make it through another battle," Lucy told her classmates. "We've got to do something." "I agree," Bristol said. "We'll help the soldiers first, and then we'll go to the palace." The students and apprentices hiked through the snow toward General White. The general was so busy commanding his soldiers he didn't notice the classmates until they were a couple of feet away. "What the heck are you doing here?" he shouted. "General White, we're here to help you," Bristol said. "This is no place for children," the general said. "Get to the village immediately." "You don't understand. We're Madam Weatherbury's students," she explained. "Who?" the general asked. "Madam Weatherbury," Bristol said. "She's the woman who's been helping you fight the—" "I don't have time for this," General White shouted. "Go to the village before you get yourselves killed." Bristol didn't want to waste any time either. She needed much more than words to earn General White's trust. With a flick of Bristol's wand, all the soldiers' damaged armor was magically repaired, and all their missing plates and pieces reappeared. General White and his men couldn't believe their eyes as Bristol's magic filled in the holes of their broken shields, popped the dents of their smashed helmets, and returned their lost gloves and footwear. "All right, you can stay," the general told her. "But don't say I didn't warn you." "Tell us how we can help you," Bristol said. "What do you and your men need?" "We need a miracle," he said. Just then, one of the soldiers blew a horn and the entire army turned toward the mountains. The classmates looked up as a menacing figure appeared on the closest mountaintop. The figure wore a tall crown that was shaped like a giant snowflake and a bulky coat made from white fur, and she carried a long icicle scepter. Bristol borrowed a soldier's telescope and saw that the figure was a woman with glowing red eyes and black frostbitten skin. Her hands were so thin and bony they resembled tree branches. Without a doubt, the students and apprentices knew they were staring at the infamous Snow Queen. Their first glimpse at the most powerful witch in the world was a chilling sight, and they shivered from much more than the cold air. "She's here!" General White shouted. "Prepare for battle!" As the soldiers hurried into position, the Snow Queen was joined on the mountaintop by 4 people wearing familiar black cloaks. The classmates gasped in horror when they recognized the cloaked women standing at the Snow Queen's side. "That's Crowbeth, Newtalia, Squidell, and Felina," Skylene said. "It can't be," Tangerina said. "What are they doing with the Snow Queen?" Xanthus asked. "They were supposed to be helping Madam Weatherbury." Bristol felt warmer as anger coursed through her body. There was only one reason to explain why the witches were standing at the Snow Queen's side. "They must have tricked Madam Weatherbury," Bristol exclaimed. "The witches are working for the Snow Queen." "Those gizzard suckers," Lucy yelled. Now it made sense why the witches were so desperate for Madam Weatherbury to return to the Northern Kingdom when she wasn't ready. The weaker the fairy was, the easier it would be for the Snow Queen to overpower her. There was no way of knowing how long the witches had been planning their betrayal, but Bristol had a feeling it was their plan from the very beginning. "Load the cannons!" General White ordered. "Sir, we have nothing to load them with," a soldier called to him. "We're out of ammunition." "I can help you with that," Esmeralda said. She knelt on the ground and quickly started scooping the snow into large snowballs. Once they were the size of cannonballs, Esmeralda transformed the snowballs into heavy emerald spheres and passed them to the soldiers. "Will these work?" she asked. It didn't take long for the men to understand what Esmeralda was doing. The soldiers dropped to the ground and made more snowballs for Esmeralda to transform, and then loaded the emerald spheres into their cannons. "Prepare to fire!" General White shouted. "On 3, 1, 2. Before they could fire their first round, the Snow Queen pointed her scepter at the army, and a massive blizzard descended from the sky. There was so much snow, it was all the soldiers and classmates could see around them. The winds were so powerful that Bristol and her friends locked arms to keep from falling. "Fire!" General White ordered. "Sir, we can't see anything in the snow," a soldier called back. "I can fix that," Tangerina said. The apprentice closed her eyes and concentrated with all of her might. Her bumblebees vacated her hair and flew directly into the storm. Her classmates didn't understand what she was doing, but soon they realized Tangerina's concentration stretched far beyond their expectations. Thousands and thousands of bumblebees flew into the blizzard from all over the Northern Kingdom. The swarm moved through the area like a giant buzzing net, and the insects caught the flakes of snow with their tiny legs. Soon the air was so clear the blizzard was nothing but gusts of empty wind. General White didn't take the clear conditions for granted. "Now," he ordered, "fire at will!" The soldiers lit their cannons and pelted the mountains with Esmeralda's ammunition. Each emerald sphere got closer and closer to where the Snow Queen stood. The witch roared angrily and pointed her scepter to the clouds. She summoned a bolt of lightning out of the sky, and it struck the base of the mountain. Suddenly, the ground started to rumble under the army's feet. One by one, hundreds of terrifying snowmen grew out of the snowy ground and crept toward the soldiers like a legion of icy zombies. "Attack!" General White shouted. The army charged ahead and battled the Snow Queen's frosty warriors. The soldiers courageously fought the snowmen, but they were greatly outnumbered. Bristol knew she and her classmates had to intervene before the soldiers were in trouble. Esmeralda, keep making those cannonballs. Tangerina, keep clearing the air with your bees. Lucy, Xanthus, and Skylene, follow me. "We're going to help the soldiers fight the snowmen," she said. "Let's kick some ice," Lucy cheered. The classmates ran across the base of the mountain and joined the men in combat. Bristol waved her wand and sent snowmen flying through the air in large bubbles, and she used rainbows like colorful slingshots to sling them into the mountains. Lucy crushed the snowmen with falling pianos, tubas, and harps, and she made deep sinkholes appear at their feet. Xanthus and Skylene put their magic together and melted the snowmen with jets of boiling water. With the classmates' help, the Northern Kingdom's army tore through the snowmen like they were made of paper. The Snow Queen was infuriated to see her adversary succeeding, and she seethed from the mountaintop. "This is perfect," Bristol said. "Really?" Lucy asked her. "Do you have other battles to compare it to?" "No, I mean, this is the perfect distraction," Bristol said. "I'm going to sneak into Tinsel Palace and rescue Madame Weatherbury while the Snow Queen is occupied." "Bristol, no," Skylene objected. "We won't let you face the Snow Queen on your own," Xanthus said. "I don't plan to," she said. "If the Snow Queen heads back to the palace, then follow her and meet me there. But right now she's fixated on the Northern Kingdom's army. This might be the best opportunity we have to save Madame Weatherbury." Bristol's plan made her classmates nervous, but as they looked up at the Snow Queen's unwavering gaze on General White and his men, they knew Bristol was right. "Be careful," Lucy said. "I'm too young for you to die." "I will," Bristol said. "Look out for each other while I'm gone." When she was certain the witches weren't looking, Bristol discreetly dashed into the mountainside and climbed toward the towers of Tinsel Palace. Bristol kept a watchful eye on the Snow Queen as she went and carefully traveled around the witch without being noticed. Eventually, the soldiers and classmates gained the upper hand on the snowmen. The Snow Queen decided it was time to send in reinforcements, and she nodded to the witches standing beside her. Crowbeth, Newtalia, Squidel, and Felina descended down the mountain and entered the battle. Although they had always stood and walked like people, the witches threw off their cloaks and revealed bodies that were more animal than human. Instead of arms, Crowbeth had large feathery wings and legs like a hawk. Newtalia had a long scaly torso that coiled like the body of a snake. Squidel had 8 flexible limbs with tentacles like an octopus. Felina's body was covered in fur, and instead of hands and feet, she had paws with razor-sharp claws. Each of the witches set their sights on a different classmate and preyed upon the children. Crowbeth spread her wings and swooped through the air, snatching Lucy off the ground like an eagle catching a squirrel. She raised the girl high into the sky and dangled her above the clouds. Lucy squirmed helplessly in the witch's clutches, and Crowbeth cackled as she struggled. "I hope you enjoy your fall as much as you enjoyed our winter," Crowbeth screeched. Lucy closed her eyes and tried to summon a mighty force to save her. Just as Crow Beth was about to drop her, a flock of squawking geese appeared on the horizon and flew to Lucy's rescue. The geese attacked Crow Beth, using their beaks to pluck the witch's feathers and rip holes in her wings. Soon Crow Beth's wings were so damaged she couldn't keep herself in the air, and the witch plummeted into the mountains. The geese grasped Lucy with their beaks and safely lowered her back to the earth. "Well, you're not the birds of prey that I was picturing, but you're the best gaggle a girl could ask for," Lucy told the geese. On the ground below, Xanthus and Skylene went back to back as they were circled by Nutalia and Squidel. They tried to hit the witches with bursts of fire and water, but Nutalia and Squidel dodged their efforts with ease. In one slick, spinning motion, Squidel struck Xanthus's face with all 8 of her limbs. The boy fell to the ground, his eyes fluttered shut, and all the flames on his body disappeared. Squidel lurched toward the unconscious boy. She wrapped her limbs around him and started squeezing him to death. "It's time to put your flames out forever," Squidel grumbled. However, Xanthus had other plans. When Squidel was least expecting it, Xanthus awoke from his pretend blackout and tightly fastened his muter metal around the witch's neck. Squidel frantically tried to pull the muter metal off, but her tentacles couldn't untie Xanthus's small knot. As her powers began to fade, Squidel collapsed and flopped onto the ground like a fish out of water. The witch thrashed across the snow, accidentally rolled into one of Lucy's sinkholes, and never resurfaced. "Skylene, did you see that?" Xanthus asked. "I stopped my flames all by myself. I didn't even need the muter metal." "Skylene?" His friend didn't respond because she had her hands full. Skylene was pointing at Nutalia and blasting the witch with the most powerful geyser she could muster. Unfortunately, the water wasn't enough to stop Nutalia from creeping closer. The witch dived into Skylene's geyser and swam through it like it was a stream. Nutalia slithered close enough to grab hold of Skylene, and the witch lifted the girl by her collar. "You stupid girl," Nutalia hissed. "Did you actually think a little water would stop me?" "If I'm being honest," Skylene said, "I wasn't trying to stop you." Nutalia had no clue what the girl was talking about, but suddenly the witch became very stiff. Her drenched body started to freeze in the cold wind, and soon Nutalia was as solid as a statue. Skylene pushed her over, and the witch hit the ground and shattered into a million pieces. "Skylene, that was brilliant," Xanthus said. "How'd you know that was going to work?" "Magic is no excuse to ignore science," she said with a shrug. Across the way, Tangerina was still in deep concentration as she reduced the blizzard with her bumblebees. Felina snuck up behind the apprentice and knocked her to the ground, leaving a bloody scratch across Tangerina's face. The girl tried to trap the witch with her honey, but Felina jumped out of the way, avoiding each attempt. "You and your friends will never win this fight," Felina growled. "I'm pretty sure we are winning," Tangerina said. "My friends have already defeated yours." Felina's green eyes glanced around the base of the mountain, and she roared angrily when she realized she and the Snow Queen were the only witches left. "My sisters may be gone, but I still have all 9 of my lives left," she growled. Felina lunged toward Tangerina, but right as she was about to strike the girl again, she was interrupted by someone clearing their throat nearby. The witch looked over her shoulder and saw Emeralda standing right behind her. "You may have 9 lives, but diamonds are forever," she said. Emeralda grabbed Felina's paw and squeezed it as hard as she could. Inch by inch, the witch's body was slowly transformed into one large jewel, and Felina never growled, scratched, or jumped again. "You're a real gem, Emeralda," Tangerina said. "Thank you." As the students and apprentices defeated the witches, General White and his soldiers conquered the last batch of snowmen. Their successful defense infuriated the Snow Queen, and the witch screamed so loudly her voice echoed through the mountain range. "She doesn't look very happy," Tangerina said. "What is she going to do next?" Skylene asked. "Whatever it is, it's not going to be pretty," Emeralda said. "General White," Lucy called to him. The Snow Queen is about to show us the ace up her sleeve. Go to Appleton Village and evacuate it while you can. You won't save your kingdom by sticking around here. Help your people safely across the in-between and take them to the Southern Kingdom. We'll hold the Snow Queen off for as long as we can." "Thank you," General White said, and saluted the classmates. "Godspeed, children." General White led his army toward Appleton Village, and the classmates stayed at the base of the mountain, waiting with bated breath for the Snow Queen to make a move. An eerie smile appeared on the witch's frostbitten face as she plotted her next attack. The Snow Queen slammed her scepter into the mountaintop and caused a powerful earthquake to rattle throughout the mountain range. The snow slid off all the steep mountain slopes, and soon an avalanche of catastrophic proportions was hurtling toward the classmates. If they didn't do something to stop it, and something quick, the classmates, the village, and the entire Northern Kingdom population would be decimated in a matter of minutes. "Xanthus, I think this one's on you, buddy," Lucy said. "What?" he asked in shock. "I can't stop an avalanche." "You're the only one with the right skill set," she said. "You've got to create a blast of heat that's powerful enough to vaporize that thing." I don't have that kind of power," Xanthus said. "Yes, you do," Lucy said. "You've got to believe in yourself or the whole kingdom will be destroyed." The avalanche was growing, gaining speed as it raced down the mountain. It was so strong it snapped the trees in its path like twigs, and it knocked over boulders that had never been moved. The closer it got, the more frightened Xanthus was. Lucy's words of encouragement weren't helping him, so she tried a different approach. "Think about the night your father died," she said. Xanthus was very confused. "Why?" he asked. "Think about how your father beat you for playing with dolls," Lucy continued. "Think about that fire that killed him and burned down your house. Think about all the shame and guilt you've had to live with ever since. Think about how you wanted to drown yourself in the lake." The traumatic memories made Xanthus's flames rise on his head and shoulders. "I don't understand," he said. "What does any of this have to do with... Think of all the time you spent hating yourself. Think of all the days you lived in fear of being discovered. Think of all the people who told you it was wrong to be who you are. Think of how badly you wanted to change into someone else." Lucy was upsetting Xanthus, and his body was soon engulfed in flames. "Why are you bringing this up now?" he asked. "Because I know part of you still hates yourself for being different. Part of you still lives in fear of the truth. Part of you still believes you don't deserve to exist. And part of you still believes you'll never be loved for who you are. I know how you feel because we all feel that way." Fire started pouring out of Xanthus like lava flowing from a volcano. "Stop it, Lucy," he cried. "I don't want to do this." "And you don't have to anymore. None of us do. Stop carrying all that shame around. Stop wanting to change yourself. Stop worrying no one will love the real you. None of us have anything to be ashamed of. None of us have to change anything, and we'll always love and accept each other. So let go of the hate and fear that other people have instilled in you. Let it go so you never have to feel it again." The avalanche plowed into the base of the mountain, and the classmates were just seconds away from being pulverized. "Now's your chance, Xanthus," Lucy shouted. "Release all the pain and stop that avalanche from leaving the mountain." "No," Xanthus cried. "I can't do it." "Yes, you can," she yelled. "Let it out, Xanthus. Let it out." "Ah!" The boy fell to his knees and a massive explosion erupted from inside him. As Xanthus's fiery blast collided with the avalanche, the entire mountain range was consumed in a blinding light. Emeralda pulled Lucy, Tangerine, and Skyline into a tight huddle, and then created an emerald igloo to shield them from the heat and the snow. By the time the light faded, not only had the avalanche completely disappeared, but all the snow at the base of the mountain had melted away. The classmates peeked out from Emeralda's igloo and looked around in amazement. Xanthus couldn't believe what he had done either, and he stared at the land with wide, bewildered eyes. The boy turned to his friends with a bashful grin. "That felt really good," he whispered. Boy, am I glad that worked, Lucy said. The Snow Queen was so enraged that the classmates had stopped the avalanche. Her frostbitten hands were shaking. The witch turned in a huff and headed back to Tinsel Palace. Look, she's leaving, Skylene pointed out. What's she doing? Tangerina asked. She's retreating, Lucy said. Come on, we have to get to the palace before she finds Bristol.